hall was buzzing with excitement, people talking loudly, laughing, and sharing stories with one another. The air smelled faintly of coffee and popcorn, a mix of casual enjoyment and anticipation. In the corner, she sat quietly, dressed in her simple habit, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes scanning the room but mostly focused inward. She had been invited to perform, but she knew that most of the people there saw her as a curiosity. A nun performing? Some of them probably thought it was amusing, others skeptical, some openly mocking her. From the moment she walked in, there had been whispers. A few people nudged each other and smiled knowingly, as if expecting a performance that would fail or at least provide them with some entertainment at her expense. She could hear snippets of conversation, soft at first but gradually louder. "Can she really do anything?" someone said. "I doubt it," replied another. She tried to ignore it, but it was difficult. The laughter that sometimes followed these whispers felt like a small pinprick, a reminder of how judged she already was. Despite the murmurs and the pointed glances, she felt a quiet determination building inside her. She had always been taught to serve with humility, but this was different. This was not about pride or proving she was better than anyone else. It was about showing herself and others that effort, focus, and courage mattered more than what others thought. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath, letting the calmness settle in. This was her chance, and she intended to take it. Around her, the atmosphere was chaotic. People moved to find seats, some bumping into each other, others waving to friends across the hall. Children ran around, their laughter echoing against the high ceilings. A group of teenagers, sitting in the front row, exchanged smirks and whispered comments. She noticed them, of course, but she refused to let their energy shake her. Her mind wandered for a moment to the countless hours she had spent practicing her craft in solitude. No one had seen those hours, the discipline, the dedication. Today, she would let that effort speak for itself. When the host called out her name, there was a ripple through the crowd. Some people clapped politely, others smirked, clearly not expecting much. She stood slowly, adjusting her habit, and walked toward the center of the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last, but also more purposeful. She felt the eyes on her, the mixture of curiosity and doubt, but she did not rush. She allowed herself a brief pause at the center, letting the audience take her in. She was aware of every gesture, every reaction, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of control. Not over them, but over herself. A few people in the audience tried to start murmurs of mockery, some laughing under their breath. One man even leaned toward his companion and whispered loudly enough for nearby people to hear, "I wonder what a nun can even do here." She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, her hands lightly resting on her sides. The mocking only fueled her focus. She remembered the countless times she had faced skepticism in her life and how she had learned to turn it into quiet strength. This was no different. She began to prepare mentally, rehearsing the sequence of her performance in her mind. She pictured the first note, the rhythm, the movement of her fingers, and the expression she wanted to convey. The crowd faded slightly from her awareness, replaced by the melody and the technique she had mastered through years of practice. Even the sneers and doubtful eyes became background noise, a blur that could not touch the core of her focus. The energy in the hall shifted as she took a small, deliberate step forward, signaling that she was ready. A few people exchanged surprised looks, as if they hadn't expected her to actually stand confidently. She felt her heart rate increase slightly, but it was not panic. It was anticipation, a controlled surge of energy that she could channel into her performance. Her lips curved into a subtle, calm smile, not one of arrogance, but of quiet assurance. She was about to show something important not just to them but to herself. The laughter and whispers had not stopped entirely, but they had lost some of their power over her. She could feel the doubt in the room like a tangible thing, but it did not intimidate her. Instead, it gave her clarity. She reminded herself of the purpose behind her effort. This was about demonstrating commitment, talent, and the idea that anyone, regardless of appearance or title, could accomplish something remarkable. Her eyes scanned the crowd one last time, and she saw a mix of expressions. some skeptical, some intrigued, and a few quietly supportive. Those few were enough to strengthen her resolve. She lifted her hands slightly, signaling the beginning. The room fell into a brief, expectant silence. Even the children, who had been running and laughing moments ago, paused to see what was happening. She could feel the tension, but it was a constructive tension, not fear. She breathed deeply, centering herself further, and prepared for the first moment that would define the rest of her presence in the hall. Every second felt extended, almost slow motion, as she poised herself for the first movement. The subtle shift in her stance, the gentle adjustment of her fingers, the soft inhale, each detail mattered. The crowd, which had been loud and chaotic just moments before, now felt like a single entity holding its breath, waiting. And in that space, she found the power to focus, to draw on every bit of experience and practice she had accumulated over the years. It was a quiet strength, the kind that comes from patience, dedication, and inner conviction. As she prepared to perform, she remembered the early mornings, the late nights, the countless times she had repeated the same notes, the same movements, until they became second nature. No one had seen that effort. Today they would witness the result, and not as a spectacle, but as proof of what consistent effort and courage could achieve. She could feel a small smile forming on her lips, one that carried not pride, but a quiet acknowledgement of her journey and resilience. The first glance from the crowd that met her gaze was one of mild surprise, some even disbelief. She nodded slightly, a gesture that was both greeting and assertion. She was here and she was ready. The hall seemed to pause around her, the murmur of mockery dying down as a collective curiosity took its place. The moment was delicate, fragile, but it was hers to own. And as she took that final, deliberate breath before beginning, she felt a calmness settle over her, an understanding that she could not control the reactions of others, only her own actions and intentions. In that silence, heavy with expectation, she felt a surge of determination. No matter what happened next, she had faced the doubts, the mockery, and the skepticism. She had stepped into the spotlight not for validation, not for applause, but to honor her own preparation and courage. And in that realization, she found the strength to move forward, knowing that the first step she took in her performance would be the first step in silencing the doubts, both in the room and in herself. The hall had settled into a quiet hum, the kind that comes when everyone waits for something important to happen. She stood at the center, hands poised, taking a moment to remind herself of every tiny detail she had practiced countless times. The crowd seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her. A sea of faces, some skeptical, some curious, a few with faint smiles that suggested hope. She focused on nothing and everything at once, letting the environment fade as her mind zeroed in on the task ahead. Her fingers tingled with anticipation. Each movement had to be precise, each note, each beat had to be perfect. She remembered the first time she had tried this years ago, in a quiet room with no one around. The sound was shaky, her movements unsure, but she had kept going. That early effort, raw and imperfect, had been the foundation. Every small improvement after that was a brick in the wall she was now building before them. She could feel it, a confidence born of discipline and persistence, as real as the wood under her feet. Around her, the murmurs were soft now. Even the skeptics had quieted, sensing something in the air that was different. It was a kind of anticipation that didn't come from mockery or judgment, but from the unknown. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, waiting to see what would happen. She noticed the shift, not to feed her ego, but as a confirmation that attention had moved from doubt to curiosity. That was the first step in any challenge, capturing attention honestly and without force. She let herself remember the nights she had spent practicing in silence, her room filled with nothing but the echo of her own effort. There had been times when she questioned herself, when the doubts had crept in and whispered that she would never be ready, that the world would not care. But she had learned to treat those doubts like passing clouds. They came, they lingered briefly, and then she moved through them. That skill, perhaps more than any physical ability, was what had allowed her to face this moment without faltering. A few rows in the front whispered among themselves. One teenager smirked, clearly expecting something comical. She did not look directly at him. Instead, she focused on the music, on the rhythm, on the structure she had internalized. The preparation had been extensive, the hours spent ensuring that even if the crowd laughed, she would have the inner strength to continue. It was a mental rehearsal as much as a physical one. The more she immersed herself in that practice, the less space the mockery could take up in her mind. Her breathing slowed. The inhale and exhale were deep, deliberate, and each one seemed to create a small bubble of calm around her. The performance was not just a test of skill. It was a test of focus, of staying present while everything outside her mind tried to pull her away. She could feel the tension of the room, but it was not fear. It was electricity, an energy that could be harnessed rather than feared. Her posture straightened slightly, not rigidly, but with intention, a silent signal to herself and the audience that she was ready. She thought of the times she had faced skepticism in other areas of her life, when people had dismissed her ideas, her work, or even her presence. Each instance had taught her that resilience was quieter than confrontation, that steady effort often spoke louder than loud declarations. Today was no different. She did not need to shout or prove anyone wrong with words. The proof would come from her actions, from the skill she had honed in private, waiting for a moment like this. Her fingers hovered above the instrument, poised to create the first sound. She allowed herself a moment to visualize the flow of the performance. How it would start softly, almost tentatively, how it would build in confidence and complexity, and how it would eventually command attention without force. Every detail mattered, not just the notes or movements, but the energy, the timing, and the feeling she projected. This was where preparation met opportunity. Some members of the audience were still skeptical, leaning back in their seats with folded arms. She did not see their doubt as an obstacle. It was merely part of the environment, like the air she breathed. What mattered was her readiness, her ability to transform that doubt into focus and action. She drew a steadying breath, feeling the weight of years of practice in her hands, in her posture, in the set of her shoulders. She was carrying more than a performance. She was carrying the culmination of effort, patience, and courage. A small sound came as she touched the instrument. It was subtle at first, almost hesitant, but perfectly controlled. She felt a rush of reassurance. The first note was never easy. It was the bridge from preparation to reality. As the sound filled the hall, the crowd began to shift in their seats. The skeptics stirred, uncertain. The curious leaned forward. The quiet energy in the room was transforming, slowly, like water finding its way into every crevice. And she continued, each note, each movement, precise and deliberate, carrying with it the essence of every hour spent perfecting the skill. She felt her body relax as the performance took hold. The initial tension melted into a rhythm, a connection between herself and the moment. The sound she created was not just technical. It was infused with emotion, with the quiet determination that had brought her here. The people watching could feel it, even if they did not yet fully understand it. There was authenticity in every gesture, in every note, and authenticity has a way of cutting through doubt and mockery. The whispers from the crowd began to fade. Even the teenagers who had smirked now seemed uncertain, leaning in as if trying to catch every nuance. She was aware of their change in behavior, but she did not let it distract her. The performance had to remain fluid, natural, and true. She could sense the energy in the room aligning with her own, a collective quiet that was no longer based on judgment but on engagement. Each note, each movement reinforced that transformation. Her mind wandered briefly to the personal stories behind the skill. The hours alone, the small victories, the failures that had taught patience. All of it was here now, tangible in the sound, in the motion, in the way the hall responded. She smiled faintly to herself, not in arrogance, but in acknowledgement of the journey. Every moment of doubt she had faced had prepared her for this, and now she was living proof of what consistent effort could achieve. She noticed a few faces softened, some even moved. There was a subtle nod from one of the older members of the audience, a silent gesture of recognition. That small acknowledgement was not the goal, but it reflected what she already knew. The work mattered, the dedication mattered, and even those who doubted could not deny the reality of skill when it was fully expressed. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, a deep understanding that this performance was more than entertainment. It was a statement of perseverance. The rhythm became more confident, flowing smoothly, naturally. Every movement and note seemed to encourage the next, creating a seamless progression. She could feel the hall responding, a subtle shift in energy that grew stronger with each passing moment. The mockery that had once hovered like a shadow was now nearly invisible, replaced by attention, anticipation, and silent admiration. It was a powerful feeling, not because she had silenced others, but because she had maintained her focus and allowed her effort to speak. Even as she continued, she remained aware of the responsibility of the moment. This was not about proving something to the crowd, but about fulfilling her own potential. The challenge had been set, the doubt present, and she was meeting it with calm and precision. Her inner focus, her preparation, and her courage were all visible in the performance, even to those who had not expected anything of value. She felt a sense of connection, not just to her own effort, but to the possibility of inspiring others to see beyond appearances and assumptions. As the performance progressed, she felt a deep, steady energy in her chest. It was not adrenaline or fear, but a calm, powerful affirmation that she was capable. Each note and gesture carried the weight of years of preparation, the quiet discipline that had gone unnoticed by most. And now, in this shared space with the audience, it had a voice, a presence, a force that could not be ignored. She allowed herself one more deep breath, centering herself for the continuation of the performance. The hall had become a space of quiet attention, and she could feel the tension transforming into engagement. The skill, the dedication, and the authenticity she had nurtured over years were now unfolding before them, tangible and undeniable. And in that moment, she understood fully that this was only the beginning, the first real step in proving not just to others, but to herself, that determination and perseverance could transform doubt into admiration. The air in the hall felt heavier now, charged with a mix of anticipation and quiet tension. Every eye was on her, every ear tuned to the subtle sounds she had begun to create. She could sense the skepticism that lingered in some corners, the doubtful glances of those who could not yet believe that someone like her could hold the space so confidently. But those doubts were no longer distractions. They were merely obstacles she had learned to navigate calmly over the years. She allowed herself a brief moment to observe the audience, not out of curiosity but to gauge the energy she was entering. Faces showed surprise, some disbelief, and a few, quietly, a sense of wonder. It was a delicate balance, this moment before the full expression of her skill. One wrong move, one hesitation, could allow the mockery to creep back in. Yet she felt a deep connection to what she had practiced so diligently, a reassurance that her preparation was sufficient for whatever response the crowd might offer. The first soft notes had already begun to ripple through the room, barely audible at first, but deliberate. She felt the vibrations under her fingertips, the subtle hum in the air, and the way the audience leaned forward, almost instinctively. This was the transition phase, where initial doubt slowly gave way to curiosity. She kept her movements steady, her breathing controlled, and her mind completely focused on the moment. Every detail mattered, every gesture and sound a small thread weaving the narrative of her effort into the perception of the room. She remembered the early days of learning her craft, practicing in silence, facing only herself as the judge of success or failure. There had been nights when exhaustion threatened to undo her resolve, moments when she questioned whether it was worth it. But every time, she reminded herself of why she started, of the joy found in mastering something difficult, and of the satisfaction of quiet persistence. That inner dialogue, often unnoticed by anyone else, was now sustaining her in the face of a crowd that had come to doubt her. A faint whisper traveled across a row of seats, a skeptical comment meant to disrupt. She did not flinch, did not even glance. Her attention remained anchored in the rhythm she had internalized, in the expression she wanted to convey. Mockery had little power over someone who had trained her mind as much as her body and skill. Every note she played was a statement, a demonstration that preparation, patience, and quiet confidence were stronger than ridicule. The subtle shift in the audience's energy did not escape her. Those who had whispered were now leaning slightly forward, curious to hear what came next. Children who had been restless were watching, captivated by the sound and presence she had established. She noticed an older man, his eyes softening, nodding faintly as though acknowledging the effort she had put into the performance. These small signs were not the reason she was there, but they confirmed what she already knew. Dedication can be recognized even in its quietest form. She felt the tension in her own body transform. What had been anticipation tinged with fear now became a deliberate channeling of energy. Every fiber of her being was attuned to the task at hand. The hall, once a space filled with noise and chatter, now seemed to exist solely for this performance. A shared experience she was shaping with every motion and note. She could feel the first signs of connection, the bridge between her effort and the audience's engagement forming subtly, almost imperceptibly. Her mind replayed the countless repetitions, the late nights and early mornings, the tiny improvements that had accumulated over time. Each one was a building block, a reason she could trust herself in this moment. She did not need external validation. The confidence was born from a long journey of practice, patience, and self-discipline. And yet, as she felt the subtle recognition of the audience, she realized that sharing that effort could be a gift, not just to herself, but to anyone willing to witness it fully. The sound of her instrument, steady now and flowing with a rhythm she had perfected, filled the hall. She allowed herself to feel the resonance, the way it traveled through the room and touched people in ways words could not. Skeptics softened their posture, curiosity replaced doubt, and a few people leaned forward, as if to catch the subtleties they had previously dismissed. The energy in the room was changing, shifting from mockery to attention, from doubt to wonder, and she remained at the center, calm and intentional. She let herself be aware of the micro-movements in the crowd, the exchange of glances, the slight nods, the leaning in closer. These were the signals that her performance was breaking through, that the barriers of expectation were being lowered. Yet she remained grounded, not for their approval, but to maintain the integrity of her focus. The connection was happening, but it was a reflection of her skill and preparation, not a reaction to the audience's response. There were moments when her mind wandered briefly to the journey that had brought her here. The long hours of solitary practice, the times she had struggled to maintain confidence, the moments when she had questioned her own abilities. Each memory reinforced her presence in the hall, reminded her that she had the right to occupy this space, to express her skill fully. This awareness was subtle but powerful, a quiet inner strength that allowed her to remain unwavering even as the room held its collective breath. She noticed the shift in the younger members of the audience, the ones who had initially whispered and smirked. Their expressions were changing, their skepticism giving way to curiosity and perhaps admiration. She did not dwell on this. It was simply part of the flow. What mattered was the ongoing performance, the expression of her dedication and skill, the translation of years of preparation into a shared, tangible experience. The audience was responding, but she remained entirely within the flow of her own focus, guided by the rhythm and intention she had cultivated. Her breathing remained steady, a silent metronome keeping pace with the unfolding performance. Each note, each movement, carried with it the weight of countless hours of practice, the discipline learned in private, and the quiet determination that had brought her here. She could feel the audience sensing it, even if they could not yet articulate what they were feeling. The subtle connection between performer and listener was forming, a bridge that required no words, only authenticity and presence. She allowed herself a brief, fleeting smile, not at the audience, but at the realization of how far she had come. The first notes had set the stage, the energy had shifted, and now the real performance was about to unfold. She felt a deep sense of calm excitement, a recognition that this moment, which had once seemed impossible, was now entirely within her grasp. The tension of the hall, once a weight pressing down, had become a shared rhythm, a pulse that she could ride and shape. The subtle hum of anticipation from the audience created a backdrop for her expression, a contrast that highlighted the precision and care she had put into every movement. The skeptics were still present, but their presence was no longer intimidating. It was part of the canvas on which she was creating something remarkable. Each note, each gesture, was a deliberate statement, a testament to the quiet power of preparation, focus, and perseverance. As she continued, she felt the energy in the room solidifying, a collective acknowledgement of the skill and effort she was displaying. The performance was no longer just about proving herself. It was about demonstrating the impact of dedication and resilience. Even those who had doubted could sense the authenticity and commitment that underpinned each motion, each sound. It was a subtle but profound transformation, the moment when skepticism begins to yield to recognition. She allowed herself to sink fully into the rhythm, to let the flow of the performance carry her forward. Every gesture and note was intentional, deliberate, and full of meaning. The hall seemed to breathe with her, the shared space amplifying the connection between her effort and the audience's perception. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a deep inner acknowledgement that she was not just performing, but embodying the culmination of years of practice, perseverance, and courage. In that delicate balance between focus and expression, she realized that the audience's shift in energy was only a reflection of what had been growing inside her all along. Confidence born of preparation, skill, and dedication. The initial mockery and doubt had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer held power over the moment. What mattered was the ongoing flow, the bridge between effort and recognition, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was fully present and fully capable. The room had become still, almost sacred in its attention. She began the performance in earnest, letting every movement and note flow naturally from years of preparation. The first sound resonated through the hall, clear and confident, capturing every ear instantly. It was soft at first, delicate, yet it carried a weight of skill and emotion that demanded acknowledgement. The audience leaned in instinctively, drawn by the authenticity of her presence. Even the skeptics could no longer ignore the force of her expression. She had transformed from a quiet figure in a habit to the center of attention, commanding the space not through words, but through talent, focus, and unwavering confidence. Each note was deliberate, each gesture precise, creating a rhythm that connected her to the room and the room to her. She felt a surge of emotion as the performance deepened. The music, the motions, the expression, all became one seamless experience. The sound rose and fell, weaving through the hall like a river of intention and passion. The skeptics who had whispered and smirked were now leaning forward, eyes wide, their disbelief giving way to awe. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Every element of her preparation was finally visible to the world. Her fingers moved effortlessly, each note a testament to the countless hours spent perfecting technique. She remembered every late night, every repetition, every moment of doubt that had been overcome. All of it was present now, tangible, audible, and undeniable. The music was more than sound. It was a story, a journey, and she was guiding the audience through every twist and turn. The room seemed to vibrate with energy, a silent acknowledgement of her dedication. Even the children who had been restless were now sitting quietly, mesmerized by the flow and precision. Faces softened, jaws dropped, and a sense of wonder spread quietly from one row to the next. She did not rush, did not push too hard. The performance had to breathe, to allow each moment its own space, and she honored that fully. She could feel her heart racing, but it was not anxiety. It was exhilaration, the pure joy of creation and connection. The doubts of the past, the whispers of mockery, the skepticism of the crowd, all faded into the background. She was fully present, immersed in the rhythm, the emotion, and the power of the moment. Every sound she created was a bridge, linking her years of dedication to the audience's growing appreciation. The energy in the room shifted completely when she hit a particularly challenging sequence. Fingers danced with precision, timing flawless, expression unbroken. The audience gasped subtly, a collective intake of breath that marked the recognition of mastery. For the first time, silence was not discomfort or doubt, but reverent attention. She could feel the connection, a shared understanding that this was extraordinary, that someone underestimated had risen to the occasion spectacularly. Her movements became more expressive, more fluid, guided by the emotion she poured into each note. She felt the subtle shift in the audience's energy as awe replaced disbelief. Even the older members, who had initially been skeptical, were now leaning forward, faces reflecting surprise and admiration. She was aware of this not to feed her ego, but as a confirmation that her effort was making an impact beyond technique, beyond mere skill. The hall seemed to hold its breath as she approached the climax of the performance. Every note, every gesture, every pause had been crafted to build anticipation and convey the depth of her preparation and intent. Her own breath was steady, controlled, each exhale releasing a tension that had been stored in her body for weeks of practice. The crowd's energy mirrored hers, a quiet resonance that carried the power of the moment further than words ever could. She remembered all the times she had been doubted, dismissed, or underestimated. The whispers that had followed her throughout the years seemed distant now, like echoes from a different world. Here, in this space, her skill and dedication spoke louder than any criticism could. Every note she played was a statement, every gesture a declaration of the power of quiet perseverance and focus. The music swelled, rising and falling with a natural grace. She felt it in her bones, in her fingers, in the subtle movement of her body. The audience was no longer just watching. They were participating in the experience, absorbing the energy, the effort, the story she was telling without words. The skeptics had been silenced, replaced by a collective awe that spread quietly through the hall. Her eyes caught a few of the teenagers who had laughed earlier. Their expressions had transformed completely, from mockery to astonishment, from doubt to genuine admiration. One of them even whispered to a friend, wide-eyed, unable to hide surprise. She allowed herself a brief, private smile, not of triumph, but of recognition of the journey she had undertaken to reach this moment. She slowed slightly, letting a gentle melody linger in the room. The quiet allowed the audience to absorb the full effect, to feel the dedication, focus, and passion behind every movement and note. The room was filled with a tangible respect, a recognition that talent combined with perseverance can silence doubt and transform perception. Even those who had been most vocal in their skepticism were now fully attentive, perhaps reconsidering the assumptions they had held. The final notes rang clearly, each one deliberate, each one resonating with the effort, emotion, and courage she had invested. The hall remained quiet for a heartbeat, as if processing what had just happened, the transition from doubt to realization complete. Then, slowly, the applause began, first a few hesitant claps, then growing louder, spreading through the room until it was a wave of genuine appreciation. People stood, some cheering, others wiping tears from their eyes, all acknowledging the extraordinary performance they had just witnessed. She allowed herself to bow slightly, her eyes meeting those of the audience, not in arrogance, but in gratitude for their attention and for the shared moment. The silence of doubt had been replaced with the noise of admiration and respect. She had done more than perform. She had demonstrated the value of persistence, preparation, and unwavering focus. The performance was a testament not only to skill but to the human spirit, to the power of believing in oneself even when others do not. The room was transformed. What had begun as a space filled with skepticism, whispers, and doubt was now alive with appreciation, wonder, and inspiration. People who had come to mock had become witnesses to something remarkable. She felt a deep satisfaction, not from the applause itself, but from the realization that she had honored her journey, her effort, and her dedication fully. The performance had spoken louder than any words ever could, and the audience had listened with open hearts and minds. As she stepped back from the center, letting the last echoes of sound fade, she felt a quiet sense of completion. The challenge that had been doubted, the skill that had been underestimated, and the presence that had been questioned had all been proven in the most authentic way possible. She had faced the crowd, the mockery, and her own nerves, and had emerged not just victorious, but transformed, along with those who had witnessed her. The applause echoed in the hall, a wave of appreciation that seemed to lift the energy of everyone present. She stood quietly for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, feeling it not as validation, but as a reflection of the journey she had undertaken. Each clap, each cheer, each whispered acknowledgement was a silent recognition of years of preparation, effort, and courage. It was not about proving anyone wrong, but about honoring the discipline and dedication that had brought her to this point. People rose from their seats, some clapping, some cheering, others simply watching in awe. The room had changed. The skepticism that had once filled it had been replaced with admiration and respect. Even those who had mocked her, who had whispered and doubted, now found themselves quiet, processing the experience they had just witnessed. It was a powerful reminder of the way perception can change when someone demonstrates skill and focus with authenticity. She allowed herself to take a slow breath, letting the tension and anticipation dissolve. There was a sense of calm satisfaction, a quiet acknowledgement that the performance had gone exactly as she had hoped. She did not seek praise, yet she felt a deep appreciation for the recognition of effort and talent that had finally been shared with others. It was a moment of connection, of shared understanding between herself and the audience, that transcended words. A few people approached, their expressions reflecting surprise, curiosity, and admiration. Some offered sincere compliments, others asked questions about her preparation and the path she had taken to reach this level of skill. She responded with humility, explaining that the journey had been long, quiet, and full of moments of self-doubt, but also moments of perseverance that had made it all worthwhile. The dialogue was simple, honest, and human, a reminder that inspiration can be found not just in success, but in the story behind it. She noticed the teenagers who had laughed earlier, now standing with expressions of astonishment. One of them approached cautiously, a smile of genuine respect replacing the smirk that had been there before. They asked how she had learned to perform with such skill and composure. She shared a brief insight into the countless hours of practice, the focus required, and the importance of believing in oneself even when others do not. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience, and they seemed to resonate. The older members of the audience, who had initially doubted her abilities, also offered quiet acknowledgement. Some shook their heads in amazement, others simply smiled, as though silently recognizing the lesson in perseverance and determination. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the impact of the performance extended beyond entertainment. It had become an example of resilience, dedication, and the power of quiet confidence. As the crowd began to disperse, she took a moment to reflect on the experience. The challenge that had seemed daunting, the doubts that had surrounded her, and the skepticism of the audience were now behind her. What mattered most was the integrity of her effort, the authenticity of her performance, and the quiet strength she had cultivated to face the situation. She realized that the applause, the cheers, and the recognition were only external symbols of something much deeper, the acknowledgement of her own journey and growth. She walked slowly toward the exit, noticing the subtle changes in the expressions of those around her. Some people whispered to each other, still processing the unexpected display of skill. Others lingered, hoping to witness even a few more moments of her presence. The energy of the hall had transformed completely, a tangible shift from doubt and mockery to respect and inspiration. She felt a profound sense of connection to this change, understanding that her performance had influenced not just opinions, but emotions and attitudes. Outside the hall, the air felt fresh, carrying the quiet relief of a challenge met and a goal accomplished. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of lightness and release. The performance had been a culmination of effort, but it was also a beginning. It was a reminder that each step taken with focus, determination, and authenticity can have far-reaching effects, not only on oneself but on those who witness it. As she walked through the crowd, she overheard snippets of conversation. People were talking about the performance, expressing amazement, and sharing their newfound respect. Some reflected on their own assumptions and how quickly they had judged her. Others spoke of inspiration, contemplating how the display of skill and confidence could motivate them in their own pursuits. She listened quietly, a sense of humility settling over her, recognizing the ripple effect of the moment. She paused briefly to gather her thoughts, reflecting on the journey that had led to this day. The early mornings, the late nights, the practice sessions that had gone unnoticed, the moments of self-doubt, and the determination to continue despite skepticism. All of it had contributed to the person she had become and the performance she had delivered. She felt gratitude for the challenges, the obstacles, and the lessons learned along the way, understanding that they had been essential to her growth. The memory of the crowd's initial doubt and mockery was now distant, replaced by the vivid recollection of their awe and appreciation. She realized that true accomplishment is not defined by the absence of skepticism, but by the ability to remain focused and committed in the face of it. The performance had been a demonstration of more than skill. It had been a testament to resilience, patience, and the quiet power of perseverance. She reflected on the individual faces in the audience, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had doubted, and the ones who had quietly supported her from the beginning. Each person had contributed to the energy of the hall, shaping the experience in ways that she had absorbed and responded to. The connection formed in those moments was subtle but powerful, a reminder that human interaction is dynamic and that perception can shift when effort and authenticity are demonstrated. Walking away from the hall, she felt a sense of completion. The challenge had been met, the performance had been delivered with integrity, and the audience had responded with respect and admiration. She understood that the true impact of the moment extended beyond applause and recognition. It lay in the inspiration, reflection, and acknowledgement that had been sparked in the hearts and minds of those who had witnessed it. She allowed herself a quiet smile, thinking about the journey, the preparation, and the courage it had taken to step into the spotlight. The lesson was clear. Persistence, focus, and belief in oneself can overcome doubt and skepticism. She had faced the challenge not for external validation, but to honor her own growth and dedication. In doing so, she had not only proven her skill but had also demonstrated the transformative power of resilience and quiet confidence. The memory of the performance would stay with her, a reminder of what could be achieved through dedication and determination. She knew that there would be more challenges ahead, moments when doubt and skepticism might appear again. But the experience had reinforced a truth that she would carry forward. True accomplishment is born of consistent effort, unwavering focus, and the courage to remain authentic in the face of uncertainty. As she continued to walk, she noticed people still discussing the performance, their voices filled with surprise, admiration, and reflection. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the impact extended beyond the hall, reaching into the thoughts and hearts of those who had witnessed her efforts. The performance had been more than an act. It had been a living lesson, a story of perseverance and strength, and a demonstration that quiet determination can transform doubt into respect. She paused for a final moment, looking back at the hall, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The challenge had been met, the audience had been moved, and she had remained true to herself throughout. The journey had been long, the effort had been significant, and the result had been meaningful. She understood that this moment was not an endpoint, but a milestone, a testament to what could be achieved through dedication, focus, and the courage to face skepticism with unwavering confidence.